I'm Madelyn Blair, and this is Unlocked. If you're serious about your career, this show is for you because this is a show all about opening possibilities so that when you're hit with the unexpected, you have options from which to choose. Now, speaking of choices, I'm delighted that you chose to be with us today because we're going to be talking about something that we don't necessarily understand all the time, although we think we do. Our topic today is creating peaceful homes. Now, if I could ask any question of my guest, no, let me ask that differently. If you could ask any question of my guest, what would it be? Would you be interested in why we are talking about peaceful homes? Would you be more interested in the spark that drove my guest to explore peace? Take a minute and jot down your questions. And if you're watching live on YouTube or LinkedIn, put your questions in the chat so that we can tackle them. I'll give you a minute to write them down, so stay tuned. Well, welcome back. You're watching or listening to Unlocked. I'm Madelyn Blair, your host. 12 years ago, my mother died. I was heartbroken. My siblings and I were deeply saddened. But an amazing thing happened as we read her will. It was an unexpected distribution. Yet all of us understood the why behind her decision. Our mother was always able to see or imagine how another person felt, and she emphasized in her teaching of us that relationships are most important. As a result, understanding what she did, we simply accepted her decision. Our focus on sadness could then gradually lead to expressions of our grief. It was actually healing. I shared this with a friend whose mother had died almost in the same time period. She described a similar situation in her family. Alas, the reaction was the exact opposite. There was anger, accusation, even fury met the reading of the will. So much so that the sweetness of resolved grief was never achieved. And to this day, fully 10 years later, anger is still present, and the siblings have drawn apart. I know meeting death is always hard, and we avoid even discussing it. But as I thought about today's conversation on creating peace starting in our homes, I was reminded of the very positive impact that peace could bring to one of the greater losses in our lives, namely losing a parent. I'm curious to see how my guest has worked on creating peace in his home with his family, and how we can all use these techniques to build peace in our business environments as well. Our guest today is Akufuna Ngonda, but he asks to be called Funa. So Funa, welcome to Unlocked.
I'm honored to be here. Thank you.
Oh, it's an honor to have you. My goodness. You know, today, Funa you and I met about 6 months ago?
Indeed.
Yeah. I was giving a talk at like a class with his team there at AmeriCorps. And we were talking about resilience, of course. But what I was struck by was Funa's responses to things. And then he talked about creating a peace room. And I said, I have to have him on the show. So finally, 6 months later, we did it, Funa. Mm-hmm. But let me tell people who you are today. Today, Funa is the Deputy Director of AmeriCorps Project Change. He's been in the past a research fellow, a programming consultant and special correspondent of Africa World Now Project and the radio program Africa Now. Funa's expertise revolves around collaborative advocacy as it pertains to citizen engagement, participatory democracy, sustainable development, economic, social, and cultural rights. And he has what he calls a nuanced understanding of the 9 core international human rights instruments and their monitoring bodies. And yes, we'll come back to that later. All right, let's see. I think that's probably enough to start. What do you think, Funa?
Wow, that's a lot. I have to double check my bio. Wow, okay. Well, I mean, that's fascinating. But it's the work that not only myself, but a number of people do. I think when you write it down, you begin to realize the impact that you have and the colleagues that share your journey. And so I am one of many who've been on this path. And so it's fascinating to hear. And when we were reading it, I was thinking of my friends and my colleagues and the people who I deeply love. And so.
Oh, that's wonderful. None of our paths are alone, but we all have a path. So I'm curious. I wonder if you could talk about what brought you to this work of peace and tell us a little bit about your journey.
Well, that's a very interesting question, and there probably have multiple beginnings to that. I'm originally from a country called Zambia, which is in Southern Africa. And one of our key principles that we hold dear to, which is our virtue ethic, even though some people view it as a philosophy, is Ubuntu. I am because we are. Mm-hmm. And so that view is placing your humanity in the context of others. And the prosperity of your neighbor as a reflection on who you are and what you share. And so it can be economic viewpoint. And so that's why collaboration is a part of it. It isn't me against you. It's us together managing the world that we live in. And out of that, we have traditions of peace and reconciliation in a surrounding where there can be conflict. The environment can be harsh, but you're intentional in creating a space for not only your family, but for the next generation to lead peaceful lives. And so that is the work. That is a little bit of my background.
I have certainly heard that phrase, I am because we are. But it's wonderful to actually talk with someone who has lived it from shall we say, the ground up. Yeah, mm-hmm. Beautiful. Well, I want to slightly digress because I mentioned those human rights. Our political leaders talk a lot about human rights, but I'm not sure even I understand them. And I've worked in the international community when I was at the World Bank, but we didn't really focus on all of them. I can remember the rights of women, the rights of a child. What are some of the other areas? Because there are 7 more. Just take a few minutes to talk about those.
Certainly. I think probably the one that a lot of people do not fully understand is socioeconomic and cultural rights. Mm-hmm. And it's actually in coordination with human rights, women's rights, and education. And it presents a holistic view of an individual, of a society, and of a nation. And so one of the ways that you measure your humanity is how you express your culture, your paintings, your artwork, your music, and how that is a part of your humanity. In terms of your economics, how is it sustainable? How is it that it can be for the next generation moving forward? Did we leave them a place where they were able to navigate economically in a sound and sustainable way? And lastly, in terms of women's and human rights, we're full human beings and we have different identities, but the full measure of our humanity is an incorporation of all of these things. And so that is why, as a man, I can say that I'm a feminist, because I affirm my sisters, my aunties, my dear wife, all the people, and they need to express who they are in the way that they were intended. And so economic, social, and cultural rights are just an augment to the rights that you mentioned earlier.
Mm. Thank you so much for that little expansion. I think it's very helpful. Um, we tend to think of things in little silos, but in fact, we are all connected and right into our environment, our economy. And I love the fact that you also bring in the arts, that's part of the expression. So
Mm-hmm.
thank you. Well, I want to talk a little bit about how we're going to define peace in this conversation. So why don't you take a few minutes and talk about what is this thing we call peace?
Peace a lot of times is viewed as the absence of conflict, and uh, simply put, to mitigate a problem between one party and another. Peace is the completion of who we are. It's a wholeness. It makes us whole. And so peace is serenity of mind. Peace is serenity of your actions, intentional in the way that you live your life in a shared space. It's acknowledging others as well on your path. And so I think the key word isn't so much peace, is building peace and creating an environment where the ethics of mutual aid and understanding and resolution can be fully engaged in the society of the families that we live in. So peace, properly understood, is something that you build, and you build with the community in which you are a part of.
Mm. Well, now that makes really good sense when you talked about your peace room in your home. I wonder if you talk a little bit about that. What is this thing, and how do you make it, and how do you build peace through it?
Well, as we know, and you come from a family, and I come from a family, and families oftentimes have challenges and disputes, and people get upset with one another. And certain families will have a hierarchy. I'm the parent, you are the child, or I'm the elder, you are the young person. And so the peace room in our family was a place where there was no hierarchy. And so one of the things that we said is that we have to create a room where everyone is 100% equal. And so as a parent, I had to look at my 5 or 6 year old child at that time as an equal member of this household that we're in. And just say that this is where we're going to discuss things if there's going to be a conflict. And we started to build it. But before that, we just said, we designated a space and said how we're going to create it. What sort of art are we going to put into this room? How the seating going to be arranged? And it's important that you do it together, so that you can have morale within your family as you're doing it one another, so that it'll add a dimension of meaning. And then you structure it into how we're going to have a conversation with each other. And for my children, when they were younger, it was a great opportunity for them to call me out because they knew that we were equal. And so, and what it does, you do that in your household, and and later on, when they were teenagers and their friends had a dispute, they brought them to the peace room and gave them guidelines of how they're going to have a conversation. And then they said, this is just the start of it. We're going to meet here, and together we're going to figure out a way to resolve the issues that are between us. And so it's an ongoing thing. And so we designated a room, but it doesn't have to be in a room. It could be in a place where people agree that this is a good place for us to talk with one another. And so that's how it came out. And it's in the tradition of Ubuntu, of I am because we are. And it is inherently a peace-minded worldview.
Okay, I want you to get more specific. I mean, I'm a visual person. I want to see this room. Tell me about what's in that room. What did that 5-year-old want to bring in the room?
Well, he wanted to put his paintings in his rooms and his drawings. And initially he wanted to draw on the walls. And so we said, listen, okay, we're going to have a discussion about this. And my wife and I said, you already know our position. And so, but in keeping with the peace room, he heard all of the voices and he brought his input. And we said, wouldn't it be nice for us to carry your artwork to different places? And he said, yes. So I think maybe we should put it in a frame instead of the wall, because we can't carry the wall. So this is artwork. My eldest son is a musician, and so we had to have a record player in there, an old style record player, not a CD player. And we had cushions on the floor, and we had incense in there and different oils from my home country that we used. We used different beads. We removed the door and we put beads instead, so that if you're having a tough day, you can glance into the peace room and it can center you, even if no one else is in the household. And so we removed that, the door, and that. It's very simple: cushions, paintings, and a record player. And but everyone is different, so they can do whatever they want to do in that room.
Okay, now for the I think equally important, which are, what are some of the rules about how you were going to talk with one another?
Well, rule number one is that we have a 90-second rule of the person would speak uninterrupted. And so even if it's a dispute between two people, you have to allow the person to speak fully. And so it was a 90-second rule, which doesn't seem long, but it actually is. And what we determined, that 3 minutes is a good way for you to figure out what is actually going on in someone's. And if it's uninterrupted, that means you're listening. And listening is the key point in resolving a conflict. And it also meaning that you stand in solidarity with them. So that's why if someone was speaking, they could not interrupt. Even if they had a clarifying point, they had to wait their turn. Secondly, is that there were alliances that were built into the system. And so if a member had a little bit more knowledge of the situation, they would speak and say, let me add this feature. Son A and son B were arguing because this happened at school. And they would clarify. And then we just ask ourselves another question: what would the world look like if we didn't have this conflict? And how would we speak to each other? How would we relate to one another? And they would say their piece, and this is, what is preventing us from living in that world? What are the factors that are stopping us? And sometimes we look at each other, there's nothing stopping us. And then we said, so let's do that. And so those are some of the things that we did.
I remember when we talked about this in March, you said there was one situation where your son essentially called you out, and how it made you feel. So I wonder if you talk about that a little bit, because I think that's one of the things that people have to kind of say, oh, I can do this.
Yes, I mean, as a parent, you want to lay down the law, and one of the things, I thought I was a peaceful brother, and so and my son said, no, you're not. You're not listening. You're not paying attention. And this is a peace room. You're just focused on yourself. He called me out, and he could do that because we were equal partners in the room. And so that was a really tough thing for me on an emotional level. And luckily, I could count on my wife and my two other children to work through that. But I had to listen to him, because those are the rules that we established in that room. And then I realized that, maybe I have been overbearing. Maybe I have been indifferent. And so I turned the question back on him, and I said, what are some of the ways that I can be better in the way that we speak to each other? And so he did it, and he loves calling me out. It wasn't just once; he did it several times. But every family has a record keeper, and that was who my son was. And so he was the peace room accountant, I guess. And so he would say, "Hey, no, that's contrary to what we agreed upon." And he would do that. And he also did to his mother. That's a brave young man. He did that. That's a brave young man.
Well, but you set the ground rules that was allowed.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that occurs to me as you're talking about this is that it does not change the relationships you have in the family. So when you step out of the room, you are the parent again, and you can be the parent.
Absolutely.
And they can be the child. Yeah. But in that room, I just find that just so illuminating in terms of that it is possible to do this kind of work. Uh, Now you said your son is they're they're much older now.
Mhm.
How, how do you see it impacting them in their lives?
Well, I think, when you have 20-year-olds, my eldest is 28, my second one is 26 and 24. And as a parent, you wonder what sort of adults they're going to be, and how they're going to engage with their peers. And I think the wonderful thing is their ability to discern issues of conflict within their friend or peer group has been really wonderful to see. My son James just 2 days ago had a dispute with a couple of his friends, and they sat down, and it wasn't a peace room per se, but he used the techniques
Yeah.
to disseminate some of the challenges that his two friends had. And then at the end of it, he said, listen, this is just one conversation. We're going to have another one and to see where we are. And the resolution is not out there. It is among us three. And it was just wonderful to bear witness to that. And I think that in your work situation, or if you're school or any other environment that's outside of your home, it's something that you can help when there's a particular conflict. And again, the key point is just to listen. Listening truly is the first step in establishing peace.
You know, you said something that is just so powerful. You said we often think that the solution is out there, when in fact the solution is within the group. Uh, when I work with organizations, it is so easy for people to point the finger and blame. Uh, and that, of course, never leads to a resolution to things. So I love this fact that not only is the problem not out there, the solution is not out there either. It's within the group. Uh, and that goes really for so many things. When you're now in AmeriCorps, you're working with teenagers.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you've brought this kind of approach into the work with teenagers, because teens are under such stress normally, even in ordinary times, they're under stress. It's just the nature of getting to be in your teen years and your body is getting ready to mature and become an adult. And all those changes are happening. How do you use this when you're working through those kinds of issues, especially today where things are so tough?
I think the first thing that we have to do is acknowledge the challenges that they face. And so, as we know, with the last couple of years with COVID and the lock-in, there have been a number of anxieties that are present. Some people were directly affected by COVID, and just some different things. And for them, they're going through puberty, they're changing. They were in a virtual classroom, and now they in person. And what are the rhythms of of their interaction with others? And so I think the first thing is to acknowledge them and just say, you know what, you made it.
Yeah.
It was a challenge. It was hard. I even struggled, but you're here right now. So you've done the first step. And the second thing is just whenever there was a dispute, I availed myself to them in all circumstances. And so the first thing is, if they're having a great day, I wanted to hear about it, and they would tell me, this is what happened. And when I would encounter them again, and I said, thank you for sharing that. And that was a powerful thing, and it helped me. And you tell them how it helped you. And then when they're having a challenging day, one of the things that I do is we go for a peace walk, and we walk down the hallway and give the student an opportunity to say what's on their mind, or just to take a breath and
Mm.
just to walk and have an intentional walk during that time period. One story which I did not share with you earlier, there were two kids who were very upset with one another, and one threw a binder to another. And typically they would get sent to the principal's office, and admin would get in. And so I reached out to the teacher and I said, I would like to have a conversation with the two of them, and see what we can do. So we sat down in another room and and I said, listen, This is a 90-second rule. I know you're upset at each other, but you have to let student A say what he has to say and let student B say what happened. And out of that conversation, we found out that they were once very close and they lived 2 houses down. And when he got to middle school, one had a growth spurt and the other didn't. And one became popular and the other one didn't. And the one who was upset was missing their friendship. And so, and he didn't even realize that that was what the issue was. And I turned to the other student and I said, do you miss the friendship? And he says, yes. And I asked him, what is preventing you from continuing your friendship? And they said, nothing. And I said, well, why don't we start by working on a new dimension to your friendship, and start at that. And so then the apologies came. I'm sorry that I threw the book. And he said, I wasn't physically hurt. I was emotionally hurt. And I said, hey, don't worry, we got Band-Aids and we can wrap them around our hearts until it gets healed. And then we can work on that. And so each day was different, and they worked on their friendship each day and they reconnected. But typically they would have gone into the principal's office, parents would have been involved, there would have been some form of punishment, but they didn't get to the root issue, and they just missed each other and they didn't know how to communicate that. And so that's what the peace room techniques helped in that regard.
I love that story. And one of the things that I draw from it is that they are still working on their friendship. You know, it's not like you say, oh, I'm sorry, and then everything is fine. It's that, okay, now we know this is what we want. Let's work toward it.
Yes.
And, you know, in my work on resilience, I encourage people to practice what I call the social practice, which is to always be reaching out and building and maintaining your social support, the people who relate to you, the people who give you support. And this is just a wonderful example, excuse me, a wonderful example at such an early age, even, of how you can do that, and knowing that it's not going to happen instantaneous, that you have to continue to build and work on it. It's a great story. I'm also thinking about people in work settings where do we ever give them the chance to stop and say, this is what's really bothering me. I remember there was I had a staff member one time who joined our division. I was a division chief at the time. And he had come from a division that was very argumentative. And so he joined our staff meetings and he was expostulating, and I took him aside after the meeting, brought him into my office, and I said, tell me, why are you angry? And he says, well, I'm not angry. And we began to talk about it. And it was about a week later, he came back and he said, I got it, Madelyn. And from then on, he was fine. He just took time and working on it. And up until he got it, the original staff didn't know how to relate to him. After that, they could. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm so glad that you shared that story. And, one of the things that we do at AmeriCorps Project Change is what we call narrative theory. And a lot of the journey into people's lives is the stories that they have within themselves. And a lot of times, or the story of a conflict that is present and no one has heard it. And I think in the hearing of that is the beginning of, okay, I see your perspective. And my late father, who passed away 30 years ago, he said oftentimes in a joking way, but I now understand what he meant. He says, some people collect stamps, some people go to movies, some people go to the great outdoors. My hobby is collecting perspectives. And he went out of his way to learn how to see as another sees. And that is a very, when I was a kid, I just said, Dad, you're just a weird dude. I don't get it. But now that I'm older, I think that part of the peace work and what you're telling me is finding out what that perspective is and seeing how it impacts their lives. And for many of, it's not even just children, adults, so often no one really hears your story. And I think if you hear it, you get the perspective. And again, the solution will organically rise in the conversations that you have. And so I'm really grateful that you shared that story.
Oh, good. Anytime. um, what are some of the lessons that you've learned from your work in forming peace, the East? And I'm going to call them places of peace, because as you were talking about the room, I imagined having like a little quilt that the family has, and that every
Mhm.
time you put the quilt on the floor, then that delineates an area of peace. I don't know why that occurred to me, but just thought I'd share that with you.
Mhm. Well, what I've learned is that we really need to pay attention to our young people and understand how they see the world and how they try to discern it. Many times they want someone to help them, but if we don't have a listening ear, we more have a pointing finger of what you should do and what you shouldn't do. And many students, in fact, have taught me how to resolve an issue. And they said, man, just laugh about it. It's not that serious. And there are times when I've had challenges with some of my coworkers, and I just said, come to think about it, that argument is really silly. And so I've laughed about it. And so I'm so glad that they taught me how to do that. They've also showed me that they taught themselves during the virtual time period, and they became their own advocate in their learning. And there's a lot of news about they're behind in certain areas, but they gained a lot in terms of going to a teacher, which I see more often. I'm really struggling with this. I don't understand this curriculum. Is there a way that we can change some of the language? And that was last year in this with seventh graders. And out of that, we decided to do the medieval period. And we did a skit, and people did different roles so that they could understand the dynamics of different roles in the medieval period. And that was children advocating for themselves. And so and they truly understand what resilience is. They live it out, they don't say it. And I think we can learn from them and how they've adjusted. And in the areas where they struggle, we can use our perspective and our knowledge to say, when it was hard, this is how I handled it. This is who I reached out to. These are the resources that are present in my life, and I want to share that with you. And so that is what I learned from sixth, seventh, and eighth graders, and they're unknown sages that we don't take advantage of. And
Yeah.
so I think once we do that, we can really start to change so many things.
Wow. I, this is one of the most hopeful moments that I've had about teenagers, hearing this story, that even during COVID, they were learning. It may not have been what was in the textbook, but they were learning, and that now they can advocate for themselves. That's a really major lesson.
Yeah, but
We don't,
it certainly is, because a lot of times, we learn that when we get to the university level,
right.
and they're doing that right now.
Yeah.
And so, and of course, we're alarmed by the test scores. But one of the things that we've learned when out of that, some of them are not really that excited about learning, but they're excited to be with each other. And so one of the interventions that we thought about was, let's do some more collaborative learning and project-based learning, and let them designate what the roles are. We can provide the curriculum. And so it's been a very intriguing process. And some kids who may have been academically behind, because they were in a group setting that affirmed them, were able to do a project that they didn't even think they could do before the pandemic. And so the news is bad, and educators, and we fully understand that. But let's build on what they've done remarkably well in, and then lend our experience into maybe even transforming the way that we do learn. And so they've been resilient, but we might be on the very beginnings of a new way of educating our children, our adults, and our society. And so that's the reason why I'm hopeful.
Well, you're making me hopeful too about this, because having taught at university level, I I was not always I did not always follow the academic director's direction because I knew that people learned differently. You don't feed them. You encourage them to remember what they already know and to use and discover. Yeah. Fabulous. Oh, goodness. I'm loving this conversation, Funa. I'm so glad I persisted and both of us persisted to make this happen. We have people in the audience who are early in their careers. Maybe they're parents of teenagers, or maybe in their careers they're at a point where they feel they need to pivot. All these things happen in our lives across our careers. What advice would you offer that would help them understand how they can right now begin to feel the kind of hopefulness that you and I have talked about and apply these lessons?
Well, I think the number one thing is to look beyond yourself and to really serve wherever you are. And one of the things that you can do as you're looking for a job, find out what the needs are in the community that you live in. There's some kids that or adults that just need a mentor in their life, and that doesn't cost anything. It requires that you're attentive to that. And when you put it on your resume, it adds a nuance to your resume, and it helps you as you're navigating workplace conflicts or understanding and all that kind of stuff. And so, AmeriCorps is the domestic Peace Corps, and we are in the real nuts and bolts of the communities that we serve. And it could be a simple thing. If you're a young professional and you're trying to figure out what the job market will be like, have a conversation with people who've retired from that field. Set up a time or ask them to be your mentor to guide you along that way, and to gather that information and just serve your community. And it could be a food drive or something like that. When we do something that's bigger than ourselves, we realize that we're all connected, and it gives you the energy you need as you are looking for whatever your prospective job is. And if it's hard for you in the community, start with your family. There are family members that that are struggling, that have needs, and be intentional about that. So I'm going to call this aunt who lives by herself, and I'm going to make it an intention to go shopping with her and have a conversation with her and to reach out and do that. And that is service. That's a powerful thing. And when people see that you do that, it's infectious, and they will join you in that regard. It might be a nephew or a niece who's just trying to understand their surroundings and their world and just say, you know what, I'm going to be that listening ear. And that's another form of service. And so serving others helps you understand who you are and propels you in the things that you end up doing career-wise.
It reminds me of a book that I just finished reading called The Smart Mission. It was just published. And in it, one of the top chapters is all about teaming.
Mm-hmm.
And what it's advocating is very similar to what you were just saying, that in the team, if you want to have a great team, you don't worry about whether someone is not going to give you credit for giving them an idea. You just know that they need this piece of information or this idea or this concept. And so you offer it to them. And that when you look at great teams, that's the way people are. They just do what needs to be done. And it's not a quid pro quo. And teams that may be good don't necessarily have that particular aspect.
That's nice.
This is okay. I need to ask one more question.
Certainly.
You've talked about AmeriCorps, and I'm glad you brought it up because I wanted to make sure our audience understood what AmeriCorps is. You said it's the Peace Corps in America, but say
Mhm.
just a little bit more about it. Because
AmeriCorps is in all 50 states, and they meet the needs of different communities. And so sometimes they've partnered with FEMA when there's been some natural disasters, and they've worked alongside. And these are people that are just like you and me. They're our neighbors, the people that we go shopping with, the people that you see in your dog park or a park in general, who've just said, I'm going to rebuild a city that may have experienced a natural disaster. What we do specifically in Southern Montgomery County is to meet underserved kids um, who are having a challenging time academically. There are 157 languages that are spoken in Montgomery County, and in the school system that we're in, you know, some of them are learning English for the first time or entering into the new culture and all of those dynamics. And we partner with the schools to walk alongside some of those students who have those challenges, and to meet them where they are. And a lot of times, you know, they have a positive academic experience. We also have after school programs where it could be career focused or working on a particular sport that you like, but a way of galvanizing that young person into a future that is beyond the circumstances that they actually face. We America is also involved in national parks and keeping them as beautiful and wonderful for our generation and the generations after that. And so all of the dimensions of service, AmeriCorps renders that, and it's specific. We have to figure out what's happening in the community that we're in and what the need is, and that is how AmeriCorps serves. If it's food insecurity, we partner with farmers and people that are in the food distribution to figure out a way for people to have meals. If it's housing, you know, we've collaborated with Habitat for Humanity, and so, but it has to be what the community needs, and that's where we speak, and that's how we act based on the need of the community.
and your focus is in the school system, if I
Yes.
recall. Yeah.
Mhm.
Fabulous. Well, thank you so much for that expansion of AmeriCorps. I think I didn't understand all the aspects and dimensions of it. So I appreciate that. And of course, I tremendously appreciate the contribution you've made today. You began with, the Ubuntu, I am because we are. And I can see and listen to you and see that coming through every time, that peace is the completion of who we are. I love that phrase. It's the completion. It's this, and that we're always building peace. It doesn't just exist. It always is built. And that the solution is not out there. It's always within us. We are so. Funa, thank you so much for this time today. I so appreciate it, and I hope maybe we can do this again.
Thank you so much, and for the people that are watching or listening, and it's an honor to be a part of this. And Madelyn, you do great work, and I affirm it. And may you continue to do that. And let's all collaborate and get to know each other and recreate the world in a way that can really matter for every single person. And so, thank you for allowing me to be a part of this.
Oh, you are so, so welcome. My goodness. All right. Thank you again.
You're welcome.
My mother never consciously worked to make world peace. She focused entirely on her family by creating a peaceful relationship with her. Although I have to tell you that she was a very friendly person, and anybody who met her ended up loving her. But that's another story. But I will tell you that no matter what disturbed my personal peace, I always knew I could find it again with her. And Her secret, just as Funa said, her secret was listening. She always listened. And this meant that when we were hit with the unexpected, we had the social support that could carry us through. And social support, creating and maintaining it, is one of the practices that is essential if you wish to nurture your resilience. I really appreciate so much how Funa has expanded my thinking of how I can work to maintain the relationships that support me. And what that means to you is that you now have ideas that you can use in your own homes and workplaces to bring peace. I think that image that I talked about of just a quilt on the ground with people sitting on it, abiding by some simple rules of how they will talk to each other. That 90 seconds, you're given 90 seconds of uninterrupted time. Great advice. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Unlocked. And if you have, make a comment in social media about what you learned and might do differently as a result. And if you're on YouTube or LinkedIn, click the like button. Better yet, subscribe or follow me. And you know what? I just realized that I never checked to see if there were any questions that came in. And we have a couple of minutes, and so I'm going to see if there were any. And it looks like we have covered them. So I want to thank those people. But I think you've got your answers. All right, let's come down here. Well, if you enjoyed as I said, if you enjoyed this episode of Unlocked, and if you have, make your comment on social media about what you learned and might do differently as a result. As always, send me your ideas of what you would like to hear more about. Just write to me at madelyn@madelynblair.com. If I use your topic, you'll receive a copy of my book, Essays in Two Voices. That little book is being used across 4 continents to do all kinds of things. And please check out my book, Unlocked, for practices that actually work. It's available on Amazon. Thank you for joining us on this segment of Unlocked. I'm Madelyn Blair, wishing you infinite possibilities as you unlock your resilience.